Hey there, Internet friends. Welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week I sit down with a guest to talk about a Disney Plus offering, usually of their choosing, usually sitting down with a guest, but I'm sitting down for a solo episode this week. For those that have been tuning in, I've been doing a lot of Hamilton episodes recently, last month or so, sitting down with just a bunch of friends to discuss their first time, in many cases, their first time watching Hamilton. Actually, I think in all cases so far, their first time watching Hamilton. And that's been a ton of fun. And I reached out to a couple people, but didn't hear back or couldn't get a schedule together for this week's episode. So instead, I decided to switch it back over to kind of the other formula, and I'm going to be sitting down and just talking about a Disney movie. And because this kind of came together last minute, I'm doing a solo episode. And because I didn't necessarily even have time to really watch something new, I decided I'm doing a solo episode today about Disney's Hercules, because this is something I watched very recently for an episode of The Castle Vault that I was a guest on. They're a fellow Disney Plus-centric podcast where they go through the show. They're going through Disney animated films chronologically. They had me on a few weeks ago to discuss Hercules, and that was a ton of fun. And so I figured I could devote a quick little D plus episode to Hercules as well. Probably won't dive into too much in case I have friends that want to come on and discuss this more in depth in the future. But for the sake of getting an episode out this week, I just wanted to kind of quickly run through some of the standards of Hercules, as well as just kind of some top level thoughts on it. Real quick, diving into the history lesson of Hercules, was originally released back on June 27th, 1997. The releases at the time, you had Con Air that came out beginning of June 97. You had My Best Friend's Wedding, came out June 19th, 1997. Batman and Robin, the Batman film with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze there, came out June 20th, 1997. Face Off, so kind of starting and ending the month of June with some Nicolas Cage. Face Off came out June 27th, 1997, alongside Hercules here. You had Men in Black made its debut July 2nd, 1997, so kind of kicking off the that series and the 4th of July run that they had right there. You had Princess Mononoke, came out July 12th, 1997 in Japan. It wasn't released here stateside until end of the year that year. And then kind of the other little family-friendly fare that you had going on around this time was George of the Jungle that came out July 15th, 1997. So that's kind of what was coming out around that time. Runtime for Hercules here, a brisk hour and 33 minutes. Nice, quick, in and out kind of classic Disney animated film. Love to see it. In the Disney animated timeline of things, this came out in between The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which came out June 21st, 1996, and then it was followed by Mulan, June 19th, 1998. So clearly Disney had a run there where they were hitting that, middle of June box office, kind of leading into the 4th of July weekend. So they were usually trying to get out ahead of whatever big blockbuster was going to hit 4th of July. So they had kind of the top of the box office usually for a couple weeks in June. Roll call, the who's who of this. I haven't done these in a while because I've been kind of skipping over this section in the Hamilton episodes, so I'm not just kind of repeating myself every week. But the who's who of here, we had the directors, Ron Clements and John Musker, who kind of worked together often. They had previously directed The Little Mermaid and Aladdin prior to this, and then they would go on to direct Treasure Planet, The Princess and the Frog, and most recently Moana. So they've had a pretty good storied career there with Disney. They also served as writers on all of those films, as well as this one. Additionally, writers, you had Don McHenry, McHenry and Bob Shaw, who would also go on to work on A Bug's Life. And then you had Irene Mecci, who prior to this did The Lion King and Hunchback, and then would eventually go on to do Brave. So shout out to all of those writers working on this film. Starring, you have Tate Donovan here as the titular Hercules, playing adult Hercules, basically, or, 18-year-old Hercules, 8, it's a plot point in the film. I think 18 years. Yeah, 18-year-old Hercules. He's been pretty steadily working on a lot of roles. He regularly comes back and voices Herc in a lot of the Kingdom Hearts stuff. He was in Argo a few years back, and he most recently has been doing a handful of episodes of the new MacGyver series as James MacGyver, aka main Angus MacGyver's father. So shout out to him for still finding work here. You have a couple actors here playing young Hercules. You have Josh Keaton, who played the acting voice of young Hercules, who has been doing regular voice work in TV and games throughout the last 20 years, including most recently. I was surprised to see this one. I thought it was pretty cool. In Iron Man VR, he plays Tony Stark / Iron Man. So shout out to Josh Keaton for that. And then the singing voice of young Hercules was Roger Bart, so Hercules singing Go the Distance. I misremembered the role he played when I mentioned him on the Castle Vault, so my bad on that. But I knew him from the Producers on Broadway back in 2001. On the Castle Vault, I said that he played the German character that Will Ferrell played. I was wrong on that. He played Carmen Gia, who he plays in the film, The Producers as well. He was Tony nominated for that in 2001, and he had won the Tony in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown in 1999. So he had a pretty good run there, going from Disney's Hercules to a couple Tony Award winning and nominated shows. And then most recently, I recognized him certainly from the Netflix interpretation of a series of unfortunate events. He played the vice principal at the school there, in his kind of very manic kind of hairstyle and all that stuff. So shout out to Roger Bart. Shout out to going back to this film and recognizing that name and then and putting all that together. Danny DeVito, of course, playing Philoctetes, or Phil, who, been working since the 70s, doing a show that's near and dear to my heart, as it is the last acting role I really had in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was Martini in the film version of that back in the 70s. Of course, he would go on to do Taxi, Twins. He was in Batman Returns. Since I mentioned Batman and Robin earlier, he was, of course, the Penguin, iconically in that. He was in Matilda. And most recently, he has been seen for the last 13, 14 years, whatever it's been, on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And then he was also in last year's Jumanji, The Next Level. So he had a fun role in that. Of course, you have James Woods in here as Hades, who has a long and storied career as a character actor. A couple things I wanted to pull out here are that he was in Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, so God forbid that. Of course, he had a pretty iconic early role in Family Guy. Ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy. Ooh, piece of candy. Kind of playing himself there and having some fun with that. I was surprised to see when I was looking this up that he's really only in a few episodes of Family Guy over its long run. But he's still, James Woods still, just like Tate Donovan as Herc, comes in and plays Hades pretty much any time Disney asks him to. So he has been popping up in a lot of the Kingdom Hearts stuff as well. You have Susan Egan here as Meg, who, in addition to playing Meg in this, originated the role of Broadway, or the role of Belle in the Broadway version of Beauty and the Beast. She was also Lynn in the English version of Spirited Away, and has had a recurring role, a handful of episodes on Steven Universe most recently. Bobcat Goldthwait, playing Pain here, is like, he's one of those people that just stands out in this movie just because of his voice, obviously. I grew up remembering him as part of a show called Unhappily Ever After, where he played like a bunny rabbit kind of Muppet character thing. And of course, he was a very iconic stand-up comedian from the 80s and 90s, largely driven by his voice, because apparently that's what you did in the 80s and 90s. You had, Gilbert Gottfried doing the same kind of thing. You have Matt Frewer playing Panic, who I originally was like, it was weird having like somebody so recognizable as Bobcat Goldthwait as Pain, and then not really knowing who Panic was, just feeling like Panic was kind of a maybe more forgotten character. But he himself has was well established as a voice actor in cartoons and stuff in the early 90s. He also played the fictional AI character Max Headroom, which is certainly somebody I've seen in pop culture of the 90s time period. If you look him up, I'm sure you would recognize him as well. And then the thing that really jumped out at me when I was looking through his IMDb today for this episode is he was the neighbor dad in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Big Bill Richardson or whatever it was, whatever the neighbor's parents. He was the dad in that. So I was like, oh hey, that was one I had never pieced together. But he is still working quite regularly, and has been basically for the last 23 years. Beyond that as well, but 23 years since Hercules, including recently he was in the Netflix Castlevania, and then he is currently on the newly rebooted Perry Mason as one of the judges in that show. And then you have Riptorn, of course, iconic voice of Riptorn as Zeus here. Again, long storied character actor, credits all the way back to the 50s. I probably first got introduced to him because my dad was a fan of the Larry Sanders Show when I was growing up. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, right after this came out, he was probably in one of the most iconic roles associated and tied to him as Zed in Men in Black, which he would do in Men in Black 1, 2, and 3 before his passing. Was he in 3? He might have passed before 3. I think that's why Emma Thompson came in. So yeah, that's right. So rest in peace, Riptorn. But great work bringing your iconic bass voice, bombastic bass to this. A few other names I want to give a shout out to without diving really fully into their history, but it's just like weird people that stand out in this. You have Paul Schaefer playing Hermes, who's always just a weird pull because he, is the iconic band leader for the David Letterman show, but like, why is he Hermes in this? I don't know. You have Charlton Heston here playing the narrator before kind of the muses take over. So that's just one of those like really weird deep cut pulls. Keith David, before Keith David was like known as Keith David, probably really, is in here as Apollo, the sun god. Wayne Knight has a little cameo in here as Demetrius the Potmaker. Obviously, if you know his voice, you can recognize and pick him out in the film. He has that run-in with young Hercules. And then a couple of kind of Disney stalwarts and regular voices that have, just amassed more and more credits over time, but were in this as well. Cory Burton plays the Titans, as well as a handful of other characters. Most recently, he is kind of the Disney and Lucasfilm go-to voice for Count Dooku in a lot of the Star Wars canon, and he was also Zeus in the God of War series, including the 2018 kind of rebootish thing, God of War. So that I was like, oh hey, there's a fun little Greek mythology tie-in. And then you also have Jim Cummings in here, who plays Nessus, the River Centaur, and again, among other characters, including I think the elderly Theban character was one of his, and he is of course the iconic voice of Winnie the Pooh, among other things. Diving into a little bit of the trivia, a few little tidbits I pulled out here. In the scene where two kids are trapped under a boulder, they say, "Someone call IXII." This is something that I mentioned on the episode of the Castle Vault that I just I'm sure probably went over my head as a kid, and rewatching it as an adult I love that little 911 reference using Roman numerals. Fun little nod to that. At one point during I Won't Say I'm in Love, the muses sing while appearing as marble busts. The busts are in the same arrangement as the singing busts in the Haunted Mansion ride at Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. So I wanted to throw that in there, given my own Disney love, as has previously been evidenced in the Imagineering story, as well as when Logan and I talked about the Haunted Mansion film. We talked about kind of that arrangement of busts. Jack Nicholson, Willem Dafoe, and David Bowie were all considered for the voice of Hades. John Lithgow was originally cast as Hades and recorded all of the dialogue, but was ultimately replaced with James Woods in the final film. Willem Dafoe would later voice Gil in Finding Nemo. That's one of those pieces of trivia here that just jumped out at me. And there are a few other bits of trivia that I didn't pull in for this episode related to the casting of James Woods here, because I just it's such a an inspired choice to cast Hades, the often depicted as like dreary, dark Lord of the Underworld, as like a peppy used car salesman type of guy in James Woods. And it very much like, I can't imagine the movie working as well as it does with anybody else in that role. And I love John Lithgow, but I can't imagine him playing the role the way that that James Woods, with the energy that James Woods brings to it. So, great recasting there. The Hydra is a rare instance of blood and gore shown on screen in a Disney movie, as it visibly bleeds green blood after its heads are cut off. Also on the Hydra, early into production, the filmmakers decided the Hydra would ultimately have 30 heads, by which the animators created one master head, and the computer could multiply the heads to their desired scale. Overall, 13 animators and technical directors spent nearly a year and a half creating the 4-minute battle sequence. I think there was also another bit of trivia in there that said something like, each frame of the Hydra sequence took 8 to 14 hours to render, because this was, obviously in the early era of CGI. But as we touched on it a lot in the Castle Vault, like the CGI in that CGI sequence looks, like it would fit in just as well in many a modern day kind of film. Obviously, it's you can still say and identify it as CGI, but it's certainly better than a lot of the stuff we see that isn't as polished or doesn't have as much of a clear visual design to it. So I really was impressed going back and rewatching this on how good that stuff looked. And then the last little bit of trivia here for this episode, at least. On July 5th, 2019, it was reported that Walt Disney Pictures is developing a live-action remake of Hercules, with the studio reportedly considering Alexander Skarsgård for the title role, and considering outside-the-box directors and writers for the film based on the box office success of Guy Ritchie's 2019 live-action remake of Aladdin. I would love to see, what they do with the live-action Hercules with this. I honestly don't think the live action things are often necessary, and I really liked Aladdin. I thought Lion King was completely pointless. So it's give or take really on what they are, but I would be down for a live action Hercules. So does it hold up? I think this absolutely holds up as a fun movie. There's definitely a lot of like of the era kind of references and product placement stuff, including like Air Hercs instead of Air Jordans or something. But like, fortunately for the movie, I guess the things they decided to like identify are at least still here 20 years later, still kind of timeless. Like Jordans are still obviously an iconic shoe. So not a lot is lost in doing that. But again, like you do have weird anomalies like Paul Schaefer being like clearly not only the voice of Hermes, but also like the visual look and style and design of Hermes. It's just like, why does Hermes look like that? Even if the Late Show with David Letterman, it's still, why does Hermes look like that? Who knows? But like overall, it's a fun story. Meg is an ahead of her time kind of character, a strong female character, who even, she's a damsel, she's in distress, but she's not a damsel in distress kind of thing. They're just, as much as I'm not a fan of James Woods' politics, he is still like a ton of fun in this movie as Hades, and his back and forth. Danny DeVito as Phil is a lot of fun. The muses and the musical styling of kind of playing around with like gospel to juxtapose against the mythology of the Greek mythology and stuff. A lot of fun. As somebody who grew up a big fan of Greek mythology, I would have liked to have seen if they could have played around with like more within the confines of like the standardly accepted versions of the Hercules myth or Heracles myth. Even that is like the fact that we call him Hercules, even though Hercules is his Roman name instead of Heracles, whatever. But like so many of the little details about Hercules is just like, this was very much the Disney-fied version of that, which again makes sense because, they're not going to necessarily portray Hercules quote unquote mom in Hera trying to kill him because Zeus had Hercules as one of his many affairs. They're definitely not going to dive into that for a Disney film, but a lot of fun in there. A couple little other stories I just want to share, which we go into, I think, definitely in more depth in the Castle Vault episode. Which basically, if you like Hercules and want to hear me talking more about Hercules, go listen to that episode of the Castle Vault. I'll include it in the links and all that stuff. Because we talked for, I want to say, about 3 hours on the film. But a couple of stories I shared on there were, in high school, I had a friend of mine, Jenny, who, for a talent show that we did, wanted to sing "I Won't Say I'm in Love," and basically like recruited me and a bunch of her guy friends to be the muses. So we were kind of her backup singers. We had like togas. We learned a little dance and stuff, and just had a ton of fun doing that. It was a fun, good time. And then also, I had like such a deep love of the soundtrack of this film growing up, because I would have been 12 when Hercules came out, and every summer, my grandmother and my aunt would take me and my sister to like a little getaway cabin at a guest ranch that they had gone to when like my mom and aunt were kids, and so it was like a week away to unplug and not be in front of video games and stuff like that, and we wouldn't there wasn't a TV there, so we couldn't watch movies or anything, but they did have we eventually started taking like a CD player or something like that. So we took the CD for Hercules, and I probably just listened to that to Go the Distance on repeat, and just would sing out to it, probably, the better part of that week. And that was probably my first introduction to Michael Bolton, because he does the kind of the professional version of it in the end credits for Go the Distance. And yeah, it was just a ton of fun. And depending on like when we went, I guess it would have been either that summer after this movie had come out, or in 1998, the following summer. That might have been it as well. So, but yeah, those are a couple of my very like fun childhood memories tied to Hercules, because this is like, as I said, with Hunchback and then this and then Mulan coming up after it. That's probably nearing the end of like my high school years, where it was like okay to watch Disney films, because I was probably coming up on the age where that got replaced by playing GoldenEye and stuff with friends and all that, in the the more video game era of and just high school in general, like middle school, high school in general, all that stuff. So this is definitely one of the like this and Mulan are a couple of the like last that era of Disney that I really attach myself to. But it was a lot of fun. Some of my favorite moments in the film are, just a lot of the songs. Like I love "I Won't Say I'm in Love" as a song, just in general, and I think it's performed incredibly well. I love, like I said, Hades is a ton of fun throughout. And I love the back and forth that Herc and Phil have for a lot of stuff. And yeah, it's just a fun, entertaining movie, kind of start to finish. There's not really a lot of wasted space or wasted time in there. It's just a good, fun journey. I love the kind of chemistry between Herc and Meg. I think he's very much aw shucks, and she's very much like speaking to my own psyche. I'm like, yep, nope. The women that I have probably been most like drawn to in my own life are much more like Meg than your typical damsel in distress or something like that. So shout out to the strong women just in general. But yeah, that's going to be kind of some of my favorite stuff for this show. Like I said, I talked at length with Josh Brown and Jason from the Castle Vault. Josh, who was on one of the episodes of Hamilton with me a few weeks back, so we kind of just crossed the streams there a little bit. I had a great time with them. It was a ton of fun. So one of my favorite podcasts that I've done in a while. So definitely go check that out if you are so inclined. In terms of where do I grade it from an A plus to F, I give this a solid A. Absolutely great. It suffers from a little bit in that, like, Hades doesn't have a great iconic villain song or something like that. I think it admittedly, I think I said this on the Castle Vault as well. It would have been tough to do because you already have Phil kind of really doing the talk singing, and I feel like Hades would have been a very similar kind of vibe to it. But I think I mentioned it'd be fun to see him do kind of an evil version of like the Harold Hill from The Music Man kind of, Trouble in River City kind of thing. But yeah, I give Hercules a solid A. It's just a great movie, not a lot of negatives, just a good fun time. Extra credit if you like this. Other suggestions that Disney Plus decided to throw at me. At some point, I remember seeing Disney Plus threw at me Hercules the Animated Series, so I'm going to give that a shout out too. It's not here in front of me on the screen I'm looking at right now, but that certainly, like, this is one of the many Disney films that spawned a Disney Channel original series, or not original series, but a Disney Channel series spawning off on that. So check that out for some fun weekly adventures if you want. But other films that were thrown out at this are The Lion King, the live-action Aladdin, which jumped out at me. I was surprised by that, not to see the animated Aladdin. Beauty and the Beast, animated, The Little Mermaid, The Jungle Book, Lilo and Stitch, Bambi, and Peter Pan. No, I don't think I have anything else in extracurriculars. I don't think I've been watching anything else on Disney Plus really recently. I've been rewatching, just on other services, I've been rewatching Avatar Last Airbender. Just like I watched that whole thing for the first time recently, and I just have thrown it on, and I'm just kind of enjoying a second kind of in the background viewing of that, as well as I've started rewatching Doctor Who. Now that it is on HBO Max. So I'm I just got to the Catherine Tate introduction. Like the Rose Tyler episodes have just ended with David Tennant. So that's where I'm at on that one. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Quick one, in and out. Thank you for joining me to listen to me talk about Hercules for a little bit. Like I said, if you want to hear more, you can follow, just in general plugs, you can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. And if you want to hear more of me talking about Hercules, definitely go check out the episode from a couple weeks ago of The Castle Vault, because that was a ton of fun. And I will link that everywhere I can here. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, and if you would like to be a part of this show, especially now that I'm probably going to be heading back into the realm of normal Disney Plus offerings, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest and let me know what you would like to talk about, and we'll try and make that happen, get you scheduled on here. Or just tweet me and hit me up and say, hey, I want to come on and talk about this, such and such a thing. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, share, subscribe to the podcast with all your friends, all that fun stuff. No, subscribe and share the podcast with all your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you again for joining me. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.